Matt's not the first person to ask this, so I thought I would go into a video and break down more step by step exactly how the GoLocke works. First half, explaining how basically a Nuzlocke works for those who may not know. There are two major rules for a Nuzlocke across all variations. The first one is that you can only catch the first Pokemon you encounter in each new area. What is defined as an area is up to you, but typically a pretty good rule is if it has its own specification on the map, it's its own area. So towns, routes, caves. Within Sword and Shield, there are multiple areas within the wild area, for example, and that's kind of unique to Sword and Shield. And the second rule is if a Pokemon faints, it's considered dead and can no longer be used. And then one rule that I glossed over in the original explanation is if you lose all of your team in one battle, essentially if you lose a battle, you lose the Nuzlocke challenge. You lost, it's over. There are also pretty common rules that aren't in every Nuzlocke but are in mine, such as the Shiny Clause, basically meaning if you run into a Shiny, it's too rare to ignore, you get a free encounter. The Dupes Clause, meaning that if you run into a Pokemon that you've already caught, you don't have to catch it again, and this counts for the entire family. So if I have a Greedent and I run into a Squavit, I get to try again for a new encounter. Then finally, you have gifted Pokemon. So this in Sword and Shield is like the Slowpoke you get at Wedgehurst Station if you have the DLC. This is the Toxel you get at the nursery, stuff like that. Those also count as encounters. Now on to rules specific to the GoLocke. How does the Pokemon Go portion of this work? It's not as complicated as you might think. Basically, I had myself actually have to catch my first encounter in Sword and Shield, just like I would in a regular Nuzlocke. That Pokemon acted as a token. That way I still have to go through the battle of potentially taking out the encounter or it taking me out, which does happen on a couple of occasions. In Pokemon Go, basically just opened up the app and started clicking on Pokemon that I saw and looked via Bulbapedia to see if it was in Sword and Shield. If it was, that's my encounter. I catch it. If not, I look for another one, which sounds like it might be easy to exploit because I could just pick the Pokemon. But usually I just went with whatever one I saw first, and you'd be surprised how often there was only one accessible encounter anyway because of things like Dupes Clause or the Pokemon just not being in Sword and Shield. So whether I failed the encounter in Go or whether I failed it in game, it still counts as a failed encounter. And from there, I just trade my token Pokemon in for the one I caught in Go, and it's on my team now. There were a couple of situations early on where this method of transferring Pokemon led to me having Pokemon that were over-leveled, but as soon as I had Pokemon that I could choose that were in a reasonable level, I didn't use the over-leveled Pokemon. Hopefully that explains it a little better for those of you who might want to do your own GoLocke and enjoy more than just watching through the series. If you have any other questions, please let me know in the comments below.